maybe the other one that was going on when ours was going on.
If you scream for Ryan's
Then I'm in trouble, yeah. Sure. Okay. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Adina Chernosky. I'm an L3 from Jackson, Wyoming. And this door does not want to cooperate with us.
Force it.
Okay.
There we go.
Who here has taken at least one practice exam for any level, any kind of exam on Judge Center? Almost everybody in the room. There's a few of you that haven't. How many of you have missed a question on layers on one of those exams? Excellent. You've come to the right place. We're going to go over everything you need to know in order to prevent that from happening, hopefully, next time that you take an exam. Also, when you're on the floor and someone asks you a question, always nice to know how it works. So what we're talking about today is layers, which is better known as the interaction of continuous effects. If you search for layers in one of those searchable comp rules, you won't find this. You'll find every instance of the word players in the comp rules. So don't do it that way. Rule 613, interaction of continuous effects. Now what do we mean by that? We mean anything that is going to apply to the game state for a length of time. So until end of turn, or a permanent that affects everything as long as it's on the battlefield, things like that that are going to affect your permanence, or the cards in your hand, or the cards in your graveyard, or the cards anywhere. That's what we're talking about, the interaction of all of those effects that are going to be continuous. Who here can tell me, of all the people who did not raise your hand, that you've never taken an exam, who here can tell me what one of the layers might be? What is one type of continuous effect, something about your permanence that might be affected by a spell or a permanent?
Regret.
Okay, what did you say, copy? Copy. What?
Copy.
Copy. Okay, copy, yes, copy. We have copy. Anybody else have another thing that might be affected? Yes. Control, okay, yes.
Power and toughness changes.
Power and toughness changes, yes. So we've got 3, there are 7. What else? Back there.
Color.
Color, we've got 4.
Type change, whether a land or a creature type.
Okay.
Ability adding and removing.
All right. What are we missing?
Text.
Text. Great job. We've gotten all 7 of them. Fantastic, guys. Now we're going to put them in order so that we can see how we apply those. Now the way I've listed it is from the bottom to the top, and I'll show you why in a second. First layer is copy, control, text, type, color, ability, power and toughness. Once we get to power and toughness, we do have a little bit more, but we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. Layers work kind of like this. On the bottom, you've got your card. On top of it, you have each layer, and each layer puts things covering up that card. So that when you look, this very top square here, when you look down through all of the layers, you are going to see only what's not covered. So if something in a lower layer does something and then something in a higher layer is going to change that, for example, you copy something with a power and toughness of 2-2 in the copy layer, and then later on you set that power and toughness to 3-3, the 3-3 is going to overwrite it. So as you can see, we start out with 3 blue squares, but by the time we get to the top, the blue's been covered by green, one of the green was covered by yellow, one of the yellow was covered by another green, so we wound up with green, green, yellow. Any questions so far? Excellent. Okay, so first we have the copy layer. A couple examples of things that copy. We've got clone, we've got clever impersonator. Clone will copy another creature as it enters the battlefield. Clever impersonator will copy any permanent that you have. Copyable values. That's the important thing we want to think about in the copy layer. Not everything is a copyable value. Effects that happen in other layers are not copyable values. The copyable values are what's actually printed on the object, and also any abilities granted by the copy effect. So if the copy effect says, copy this permanent, and it gets this ability that at the beginning of your upkeep, you can return it to your hand, then that is part of the copy layer because it was created by the effect that copied it. Other than that, we're looking at name, banner cost, color indicator, card type, subtype, supertype, rules text, loyalty, power, and toughness. Our next layer is control. In the control layer, we have things like mind control, active treason, permanents which can steal permanents from your opponents. Now you control them instead of your opponents controlling them. That's basically it for the control layer. Our next layer is text. Can anybody think of an example of something that would change the text of a card? Yes, back there.
Mind bend actually just changes the text of a card.
Okay, and what was your suggestion?
Sleight of mind.
Sleight of mind, okay. Sure.
Humility?
Humility. Now, does that actually change the text of the card? What that does is that grants, that actually removes abilities. That's going to be in the ability layer, so that's not going to be in the text layer. Text, we are just talking about things like, just like they said, mind bend. There is one other ability more recently. Yes?
Splinter Twin.
Splinter Twin doesn't actually change the text. It's, yeah, an ability. So Cyclonic Rift actually has something that changes the text. If we pay the overload cost, then we are going to replace the word target with the word each. So we're actually changing the text on this spell while it's on the stack. That's what we're talking about with text. And we're also talking about mind bend, which of course change the instance of this basic land type or this color word with another one. Yes?
Do the laces apply in this layer or in the color layer? Like pure lace and
I would have to look up the text for that card unless you know the Oracle text of it.
I don't, I think it says replace instances of one land type name with another land type
Okay,
name.
if it says that, then that's a type change. I mean, if it says that, then that's a text change. If it's changing the type of the card, then that's going to be in the type layer, yes.
So going back to how they work with your preface of that, and this layer going with copy, replacement effects with the text. If you were to copy that, say like Cyclonic Rift, is that kind of like a modal spell where if you apply that copy, it's also applying that text change?
Okay, so when the spell is on the stack and you're copying it, yes, you are copying which mode you've selected, or the alternate in this
The
case.
alternate text.
Yeah, you've paid an alternate casting cost, so the spell that's on the stack says each, so you're actually, when you copy the spell, that's a little bit different than when you copy an object. Yes?
So, similar to what he is, modal is actually routed into this as well? Sort of, like you?
I mean, I used overload as an example because you're actually changing the text.
Sure.
You know, that's what this does. Most modal spells, you're not actually changing the text, you're just selecting one thing or the other. So, for example, the charms.
Sure.
You're not actually changing the text that's on the card, you're just saying, I picked this one and this one. The other two are still there, those are just options that you didn't choose.
Sure.
So it's not actually changing. This is an instance of something where the text is being changed.
Sure.
So if we had any kind of an enchantment or anything that's going to change the text of a spell, that's going to apply in the text layer. There are actually very few things in the game that apply in the text layer. Most of them apply either in the ability layer, or the copy layer, or possibly the power toughness layer. But you're not going to see a whole heck of a lot that's going to be in the text layer other than cards like Honey. Yes?
Splice applies in this layer. Yes.
So I don't want to get too much into spells. Like I said, I use this as an example because there aren't very many instances where it changes the text. Splice actually, yes, it adds the text onto the spell, and then when you copy the spell, copying spells is different than copying permanents. So I don't want to get too bogged down into that because that's going to copy what's on the spell that's on the stack once you've created the spell on the stack. So any other questions that don't deal with spells, that just deal with permanents? Okay. So after the text layer, We have the type layer. Type, we're looking at creature type. Creature is a type, artifact, enchantment. We're also looking at subtypes and supertypes. So for example, Mycosynth lattice turns everything into an artifact in addition to its other types. It doesn't override anything, it just adds artifact. Blood moon, however, non-basic lands are mountains. That replaces a subtype, so it's a basic land or a non-basic land, but it's a land dash, now it's a land dash mountain, whatever it was before. Doesn't change it into a basic mountain, it just changes it into a mountain, and by doing so, removes the ability that says whatever it says, and adds the ability tap for 1 red. Because it says non-basic lands are mountains and not mountains in addition to their other types, mountain is going to override whatever subtype they were before. Over here we also have xenograph, which when it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, and each creature is now that type in addition to its other types. So you have to look very closely and make sure if something says in addition to, it's not going to wipe out any of the other types. If it doesn't say in addition to, it will supersede the other types. And if it's a type, it'll supersede the type. If it's a super type, it'll supersede the super type. And if it's a subtype, it'll supersede the subtype. So for example, if it says creatures you control are goblins, then if they are a elf warrior, elf is gone, warrior is gone, and now they're just a goblin. It doesn't change the creature part. It only changes the goblin part, elf, whatever that is. Any questions about type changes?
What if there's 2 that apply both to the same type layer?
If we have 2 things, so we have one that says all creatures are goblins, and we have another thing that says all creatures are elves. Anytime we are in any layer and we have multiple things that are happening in that same layer, now we're going to look at timestamp. We're also going to look at dependencies, but we're not really going to get to that in this seminar. Not very many things are dependencies, but if there is no dependency, then we're going to go to timestamp. So most of the time, you're just going to be looking at timestamp. What a dependency means is this one depends on this one, and if this one applies, then this one either no longer exists, or applies to different objects, or doesn't apply at all. And so most of the time we don't have a dependency, we just have 2 independent things. This says it's goblin, this says it's an elf. Which one do we do? So we're going to look at timestamp. Which one entered the battlefield or began applying first? So if you have something that says pay 1, target creature is an elf until end of turn, when you paid 1 and that ability resolved, that's the timestamp for that particular permanent to become an elf. If it's something like an enchantment, then it's going to be when it entered the battlefield. So when it entered the battlefield, that's when the timestamp was. If it's something like equipment, when it was equipped, that's going to create the timestamp for when we're going to apply that. So we take the oldest one, we apply that first. Then we take the newer one, we apply that. So if that supersedes it, it will overwrite it. And the only thing remaining will be the newer timestamp. Now if that effect goes away, for example, it's something until the end of turn, and the other one is left, the other one is just a permanent effect. Once that end of turn goes away, that other effect is still there. So the important thing to remember is that when we're dealing with layers, you're never actually erasing anything, you're just covering it up with something new. And if that something new goes away, that other something is still there. You just can't see it when you're looking down from the top through the layers. Any other questions on type? Okay. Next we have color. Again, pretty obvious one. All creatures are black. Target creature becomes blue in addition to its other colors until end of turn. We have the same thing here that we saw in the type layer, and in any layer really. If it does not say in addition to, then it's going to supersede it and it's going to wipe it out. If it does say in addition to, it's just going to add to it. So for example, if you have these 2 permanents on the battlefield, and you made something into a blue creature until end of turn, and then after that you play Darkest Hour. Darkest Hour has the newer timestamp. So first it's blue, then it's black, and the black removes the blue. So if it was a white permanent to start out with, Indigo Fairy would make it blue and white, and then Darkest Hour comes along and says, nope, now you're just black. apply in the ability layer. Pretty much anything that's going to be printed in this text box is probably an ability. So, for example, creatures you control have trample. That's an ability. Creatures your opponents control lose trample and can't have or gain trample. Ability granting, ability losing. Enchanted permanent has indestructible. Indestructible is an ability. Can anybody name some other abilities out there? What else could be an ability? Hexproof. Flying. Lifelink. Reach. Planeswalk. What did you say? Landwalk. Yes.
Bands with others.
Bands with others.
You're a terrible person.
Just about everything you can think of is some sort of an ability. So, how about, how about devotion? Is that an ability?
Their abilities dependent on it.
Does it? Yeah, I was going to say, depends on the card, depends on what the card says. If it's something like a god that has an ability that says, if there are 7 or fewer lands of this kind, or 7 or fewer permanents with this in their mana cost, this isn't a creature. Well, that's an ability. So all of that's going to apply in layer 6, the ability layer. Then we move on to power and toughness. Now, as I said before, power and toughness is a little bit more complicated because there are sublayers for power and toughness. Who can tell me some of the different sublayers of power and toughness?
Switching.
Switching is definitely one of them, yes.
Setting.
Setting. Adjusting. Counters. Okay? Well, there is another one. Does anyone know what the other one is? Characteristic defining abilities, yes. What is a characteristic defining ability? What does that mean? Okay, we have an example. Tarmogoyf. Why is Tarmogoyf a characteristic defining ability, and why does that matter? Yes?
So anything with a star in its power or toughness,
Okay.
it actually will change the card in any of the zones.
Okay.
Rather than, like, normally any of the power and toughness affecting things only happen on the battlefield.
Okay.
So for instance, Tarmogoyf
Mhm.
will check all the time.
Yes. So the important thing about a characteristic defining ability is that it applies in all zones. So if you have something that is called a characteristic defining ability, or CDA, that is going to apply in exile, that's going to apply in your hand, that's going to apply in your library, that's going to apply in your graveyard. Characteristic defining means exactly what it is. That list of characteristics that we saw in the copy layer, things that would normally be printed on a card, if they are defined by an ability, that is a characteristic defining ability. For example, Tarmogoyf. Tarmogoyf says power and toughness, which would normally be, here we have them in order. Characteristic defining is first, then setting, then modifying, then counters, and then switching is final. So Tarmogoyf says its power is equal to the number of card types among cards in all graveyards, and its toughness is equal to that plus 1. That is something that would normally be printed on the card. So we would normally see right here a number, not a star. There are other characteristic defining abilities that don't apply to the power and toughness, such as if it says this card is blue, for example. I think Evermind is the card that it says Evermind is blue. That is a characteristic defining ability that ordinarily would be printed somewhere on the card, and because it isn't printed on the card, it doesn't have a mana cost that makes it blue, therefore it has an ability that makes it blue. Transguild Courier is all colors. So that is an ability that is a characteristic defining ability. Yes?
So in the newer cards, they have a little
Color indicator.
color indication
Color
box
indicator, yes.
that replaces that line that would say this is now blue, right?
Yeah, so the purpose of a color indicator is so that when you have something that removes abilities, it doesn't remove the characteristic defining ability that you need to define what color it is. So that's why we now have color indicators. It was something that they came up with so that they wouldn't have to use characteristic defining abilities because they just have the indicator now.
Sure.
I don't know if they've errated every single card that ever had a characteristic finding ability, but I know that now you won't see that as often because it will be printed with a color indicator so that you know what color your card is, even if it doesn't have a mana cost, because it's a double-faced card or something else. What's that?
I believe they've all been errata.
They've all been errata. Okay. Yeah, that's definitely something that's going to be in the Oracle. It's going to say, you know, that now it has a color indicator. If they ever reprint it, of course, they'll reprint it with the color indicator. But we definitely do still see it a lot with power and toughness, in the power and toughness layer. There's an artifact that its power and toughness are equal to, actually there's two artifacts. Power and toughness are equal to the number of artifacts that you control. So things like that, things like Tarmogoyf, it's a characteristic defining ability. Setting the power and toughness. They've added some errata to a lot of these now to say base power and toughness. So instead of saying target creature you control becomes 7/7 until end of turn, now it would say the base power and toughness of this creature is 7/7 until end of turn. They have done that just to make it a little bit clearer for players and also for judges that this is in the setting layer, not the modifying layer. So we're setting the power and toughness, we're saying this is it, it starts out at this. So it used to be a 2/2, no, now it's a 7/7. Other effects that modify it apply in a different layer. So if it has some sort of equipment or something that's giving it a bonus, that's going to apply later. First, it's a 7/7. Then we have our modifying layer. Our modifying layer, giant growth. Target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. There are other modifying effects that may last longer than until end of turn. Creatures you control get +1/+1, or creature tokens you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. The +1/+1 part, that's going to apply in the modifying layer. After modifying, we look at how many counters are on how many counters are on your permanent. So for example, the spell puts a 1/1 counter. Once the 1/1 counter is there on the battlefield, it just sits there, and it's on top of whatever's in the copy layer, whatever's in the setting layer, whatever's in the modifying layer, and then on top of it you have the counters. And then finally, the switching. This is the tricky one. So whenever we have something that says switch power and toughness until end of turn, we are not going to switch it and then add to it and then switch it back and then add to the other number and then switch it back. It doesn't go by time. Time is irrelevant. Switching happens in the switching layer. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to calculate everything that's going on, go through all the layers, go through all the power and toughness. What is the power and toughness? And then when you have your almost final answer, you're going to switch it. So the power becomes the toughness becomes the power. So anything that modifies the power is going to modify the power. Anything that modifies the toughness is going to modify the toughness. And then once all those modifications are done, at the very end, that's when you're going to switch them. Does anyone have any questions about switching? Yes?
So, what are the effects of just to all your creatures +1/+0?
Okay, so what layer does that apply to? Which one of those layers is it going to be? Modifying. So first we're modifying it. We're giving it +1/+0. Here's your power, here's your toughness. +1/+0. So if it started out as a 2/2, now it's what? 3/2. Okay. Then, yeah, the enchantment's in play. So that makes it a 3/2. Then we look at modifying, nothing modifying it, no counters on the permanent. Switching power and toughness. We got a 3/2. Choke, now we have a 2/3. And then it doesn't matter if after that you play something else because we're always going to look at it first and then switch it. Any other questions about switching? Yes?
So what if we have multiple things that are switching power and toughness?
Okay, if we have multiple things that are switching power and toughness, again, we're going to look at timestamp, but switching is switching. So you're just going to switch it back, switch it, switch it back, switch it back. So if you have 2 of them, then your power is just going to be your power as if it was never switched. Your toughness is just going to be your toughness as if it were ever switched. If there are 3, then they're going to be backwards. If there are 4, if there are 5, so on and so forth. So it's just going to switch it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth as many times as you have the effects until you get to the end. Any questions about that? So we had Craig Puka, I always want to call him Craig, I don't know why. Okay. A couple of other things about layers. We talked about this. If we have 2 things that apply in the same layer, we're going to apply them in timestamp order. One other sneaky, tricky thing. If an effect begins to apply in one layer, it will continue to apply even if it is later removed. So as we're going through our layers, we go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, in layer 4, Heliod says, this is not a creature, or this is a creature. And then we have turn to frog. So if it's a creature, then it's a legal target. So our devotion is 5, it's a creature, and then someone casts turn to frog. So up in layer 6, then we have, layer 4 is the type layer. And then in layer 6, it loses the ability. So even though it loses this, it's not erased. It's like we just took a blank piece of paper and laid it on top of this. So we can't see this anymore. It's just a blank text box. It doesn't have any abilities. However, we've already applied the ability that says whether or not it's a creature. What happens if later in the turn our devotion drops below 5?
Still a creature, still a creature.
Why is it still a creature?
Because the toad.
Turn frog means
Okay. Did turn to frog turn it into a creature?
no, we changed it while it was a creature, giving it the ability to maintain being a creature.
Does it say target creature becomes a creature?
No.
Okay. So it doesn't actually give it the ability to be a creature. All it does is it says this creature is a 1/1 blue frog. So for example, if you had something that said, this is now an artifact, or you turn it into an equipment, target creature becomes equipment or something like that, and it loses its power and toughness, it loses its creatureness, it's not going to matter what its power and toughness were anymore, because that's going to get covered up in the type layer by the fact that not a creature anymore. So we have the same thing happening with Heliod. This doesn't grant it the ability to become a creature, it just already is a creature. However, the devotion is in the type layer. So the beam state is constantly checking. It goes through every single layer, and then when it gets to the end, it's going to say, okay, what do I have? It's constant. That's why it's called a continuous effect. There's no point where it says, oh, well, we're not going to look at layers until we check state-based actions. No. Layers always apply. So in this instance, if our devotion drops below 5, then it's going to go up to the type layer and it's going to say, oh, okay, I'm not a creature. Then it's going to lose all of its abilities, but it doesn't matter because we've already applied the I'm not a creature to it. And in the abilities layer, because it's lost its abilities and also because it's not a creature, it's just going to be a legendary enchantment with nothing in its text box. And the 1/1 is going to go away. It will still be blue. It won't be a frog because it's not a creature anymore. So do we have any more questions about 613.5?
So if you regain, if you
Yes.
regain your devotion, it
Yes.
still turns back into a 1/1 blue frog.
Yes, it will.
Okay, that's
It will, because that is going to apply until end of turn. So all those effects are still sitting
good. Then I
there.
did track. Okay.
It's just that when it stops being a creature, then it just ignores the other ones, and then when it becomes a creature again, oh, they're still there. I'm still a 1/1 blue frog. Okay. Now we have some scenarios for you. Scenario number 1. You have a birds of paradise. You cast Titanic Growth, giving it +4/+4 until end of turn. After that resolves, your opponent casts Diminish, which says target creature becomes 1/1 until end of turn. What is your birds of paradise now? Yes, I see 5/5 held up in the air back there. 5/5. Why is it a 5/5?
Because the diminish applies before the giant growth making the birds of paradise a base 1/1, and then giant growth comes over the top.
Exactly. We have our setting ability, and then we have our modifying ability. So first it becomes a 1/1, then it gets +4/+4. Diminish didn't do what your opponent thought it was going to do, or they were just being nice and they wanted you to have a bigger creature. Okay, next we have this interaction. We have a Sarkin the Dragon Speaker. You've activated its first ability and turned it into a creature. And then, actually your opponent has done that, and now you have copied it. Yes?
You get a Sarkin the Planeswalker on your side of the field that, you get a copy of a Planeswalker.
Yes. You get a copy of the card. It's going to copy the card. It's not going to copy the abilities that are in the other layers. So in the copy layer, we have Planeswalker, Sarkin, with all those things. So you're going to have an unanimated Planeswalker. Of course, theirs isn't going to be anything because it's not on the battlefield anymore, so that's good. And you have a Sarkin, which you can activate on your own turn, but you can't really do anything on their turn. Very good. Next scenario. Your opponent casts Dismember, targeting your Altec Bloodseeker. In response, you cast Inside Out, which resolves. Then you kill 2 of your opponent's creature. Then the Dismember is going to resolve. Okay? So first we have Altec Bloodseeker. We've got a Dismember on the stack. We cast Inside Out, switching its power and toughness. Then we kill 2 creatures, giving it +2/+0 twice. What is our creature? Our Altec Bloodseeker, before Dismember resolves. Yes?
It'll be a 1/5.
It'll be a 1/5. Any other answers?
It'll be a 1/6.
It'll be a 1/6. Before Dismember resolves. Okay. Why? Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Because you apply all of the modifying abilities before you switch, and then you switch at the last thing you do. So you end up with a 1/6 prior to December result.
Okay. So yes. So what happens is it's a 2/1. In the modifying layer, it gets +2/+0. It gets +2/+0 again, making it a 6/1. Then in the switching layer, it becomes a 1/6. Now we have Dismember resolving. Do we get to keep our creature?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's now a...
0.
Yes.
Well, -4/4.
Yes. There you go. Yeah. -4/1. So with 1 toughness, it will remain on the battlefield. Okay. I do have some more scenarios. It looks like we have 2 minutes left. So we'll do this complicated scenario. So you control all of these permanents. You've stolen the bear with Olivia. So you made it into a vampire, and then you took control of it, putting a 1/1 counter onto Olivia. And you also control all the rest of the things that are on the battlefield.
why haven't we won?
What's that? Why haven't we won yet? Well, because we haven't attacked. Okay, so we've got our Olivia. We also have a Lord of Lineage. Let's look first at Olivia. What color is Olivia right now?
Black.
Straight like.
Black. Is she red? Why not?
Target.
Darkest Hour says all creatures are black, supersedes everything. Okay, Olivia is black. What's her power and toughness?
7/7.
Okay, so she's a 3/3. She gets +1/+1 from the counter, making her 4/4. She also gets +2/+2 from the vampire because she's a vampire. And what about Ashmore Lineage?
She's not ready.
She's not red anymore, so she doesn't get the ability because it's red. She just gets the ability because she's black. So +1 there. So 1, 2, 3, 4 + 3 is 7. So she's a 7/7. What about our bear?
Is that a 4/4 or?
Yeah.
That is a 4/4 bear.
Vampires.
I mean, it's a 7/7.
time to do was pass out these little sheets to you, which I'm going to pass out now. If you can just, pass them across. So these are nifty little power and toughness cheat sheets for you. Didn't want you to cheat during the seminar. Okay. You just take one and pass it, and I'll put some over here too. There. All right. You have the next one? Okay. Fantastic. So what we want to do is when we're analyzing things like this that have a lot of complicated things, just start at the bottom, go through. When you get to layer 4, you say, oh, okay, type layer, okay, it's a vampire. And then you say, oh, color layer, okay, it is and actually color is, so in 4, type becomes vampire, in 5, becomes black, then you get 6, abilities, no abilities, 7, okay, now we're in layer 7. In 7C, it gets the +2/+2, and the +1/+1, making it a 7/7 black bear vampire. And I think she says vampire in addition. Yes, vampire in addition. So it is still a bear, but now it's a vampire bear. All right, any final questions? Yes.
Okay, so it took me a minute to find this particular card. If you have a characteristic defining ability that is set by a trigger or by some other condition, what is it if that condition has ever been set? If it's in your hand.
Okay.
The specific example is Sewer Nemesis. As it enters the battlefield, choose a player. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in that player's graveyard.
Okay.
It's in your hand and has never entered the battlefield.
Okay.
What is its power and toughness in your hand? It is a characteristic function.
So characteristic defining ability, it depends on what's in their graveyard.
But it doesn't, you choose the player, so the...
Oh, you haven't chosen, I see.
And-
Okay, so it's undefined.
So it's like,
Yeah, we are actually at time, so if you have any further questions, please feel free to come up to me during our breaks or anything like that. I will be happy to answer any other questions that you have about layers or anything else. But thank you so much for coming to my seminar, and enjoy the rest of your day.